This is the Sabre Coach Kate podcast, where I highlight the great thinkers, athletes, and coaches in the dynamic sport of Olympic fencing.
Guard.
Delia Turner is a vivacious, energetic woman who has accomplished much in life simply by, as she says, showing up. She has held a wide variety of jobs, including legal secretary, science teacher, English department chair, published author, calligrapher, and adjunct faculty at Temple University. She started fencing at 40 years of age and has become one of the top veteran women saber fencers in the U.S. and in the world. Listen as she talks about her fencing career, how her role as an educator helped her fencing skills, and about the two protagonists she created for her fantasy books. She also gives advice to adult fencers and tells us why fencing saber is like writing with a fountain pen. Tune in now to hear the stories of a wonderful storyteller, Delia Turner. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Sabre Coach Kate podcast. This is the first interview I've been able to do in a little while, and I am delighted to be able to reconnect with all of you and to be interviewing Delia Turner today. She is a veteran saber fencer extraordinaire, and I can't wait to hear more about her fencing life and her career as an educator. So Delia, thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled.
Okay, well, let's get started here with the obvious question. How did you become a fencer?
It was kind of by accident, like most things in my life. My daughter fell into fencing when she was in fourth grade, and after spending several years taking her to national events, taking her to tournaments, taking her to practice, she started taking the train to practice because she was now in high school or late middle school, and I had to get there and sit and wait for her, and I still didn't understand what was going on. So my coach at the time had a parents' practice day to let us know kind of what was going on with the kids, because at that point she was a foil and épée fencer, and I never knew whether she'd won or not, or whether she'd scored touches. And he had this parents' day, and I knew I was going to like it because I like sports, but I loved it. Mary Fry, who is a very senior referee, was at my club, and we all fenced a little épée with her, a couple of touches when we were all done. And I scored a couple of awful touches on her and was thrilled and totally hooked. And I started taking the adult class. So I started in my early 40s. I started as a veteran. Mm-hmm. I'm always urging parents to start fencing themselves.
So what weapon did you start with then?
I started with foil because Mark Masters, my coach at the Fencing Academy of Philadelphia, started all fencers with foil. First year or so, everything I did was foil. Laura Masters, who was also a coach at Fencing Academy of Philadelphia, suggested that I would want to do veteran saber, which was sort of just starting then. And I will tell you that I loved the look and the feel of a saber, but there wasn't really much women's saber to speak of at that point.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, at what point were you able to fence saber?
My husband gave me a saber for Mother's Day, and it was a dry saber. It wasn't electric. We weren't fencing electric at practice, but it felt wonderful. And there was a quirky little bunch of saber fencers at the club. It was always primarily a foil and épée club, but we always had a small number of strong-willed saber fencers, and I started fencing saber along with foil.
Okay.
And so that was how I started with saber. I was still doing foil, but I gave it up as soon as I was allowed to.
What is it about saber that appeals to you so much?
and you're a saber fencer, so you know, the guard is beautifully curved. It's a beautiful shape. It looks like a weapon. It looks like something that should be slashed. And I like the movement it makes through space. I don't much care for necessarily the stabby kind of thing. I really like the swoosh and the slash and the ability to make flying actions. The weapon itself is part of it. And part of it is that when I first started fencing saber, I literally, when I used the term flying, I really felt as if I was flying through the air because the acceleration was so fast and it was so short term. That's another reason I like saber, because I have exercise asthma and it's short intervals of intense exertion followed by walking back to the on-guard line so I can catch my breath.
And perhaps fixing your hair or your socks or something like that to stretch it out a little.
Asking the referee politely why that particular call was made, fixing my shoelaces, straightening my hair these days. That's one of the reasons I've got longer hair, is that I have hair to straighten now. Really, I don't have as many problems with it as I used to. I have an inhaler. I was diagnosed in my 30s, but saber is easier in terms of the kind of long-term exertion that you have to have for me.
I never thought about that being a feature of saber, but yeah, that's really interesting. Did you play any sports as a kid? You mentioned that, you started fencing in your 40s, but, were you already athletic?
Yeah, and I'm rare for my age. People my age, in the period that I was growing up in the 60s, girls did not play sports, but I went to a girls' school. I went to a private girls' school, and I played hockey and softball and lacrosse and basketball and whatever else came down the pike. And also, where I lived, girls were likely to be playing a sport, a pickup sport out in the school playground nearby. So I did play a lot of sports, but because I had exercise asthma, which was not diagnosed at that point, I was able to do really well. I'm very athletic up to a certain point. And then I would be bent over the side fence of the field, turning purple and making horrible noises. And the gym teachers, the coaches would be saying, well, Delia has short wind. That's an old phrase, short wind, and she needs to build up her wind. We advise her to exercise during the summer. It wasn't short wind. I had exercise asthma. And I started during the jogging craze of the 70s. I started jogging, and I kept running distance into my 40s, and I completed a marathon. So, yes, I'm athletic. Yeah. I finished in under 4 hours and realized I would never do that well again in my life.
That's incredible.
So, yeah.
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of your coaches already, Mark Masters and then also some of the, like Mary Fry, some people that you've known in the fencing world. Who are other coaches and people that have had an impact on your fencing?
Wow, that's a big, big question. When you've been fencing for 23 years, everybody has been an influence on me. Mark really was my first coach, and he was my coach for a very long time. And as I say, his club is primarily foil and epee. But he gave me lessons in saber, and he adapted a great deal of what he knew to help me become a more tactical fencer. And as I developed more as a fencer, I adapted some of his ideas deliberately to saber. He would give me an idea, and I would say, I'm not going to use it the way you're showing it to me, but I can use it in a different way. And so I had a lot of things, some of which I still use today, that were really adaptations of adaptations, and we kind of crafted a saber, some kind of a saber grammar, as it were, as a result. Laura Masters had a footwork class that I took, and she's a wonderful coach. I really love her a lot, and both of them are great. But a young man that I knew, who I had known since he was about 15, came back from college and started coaching at the club, Aaron Lalonde. And I started taking lessons with Aaron, and he was a saber fencer. We kind of grew up as coach and student together after he had graduated from college. And he was my coach for a very long time, but then he left FAP. And I went to Kate Thomas's club in nearby Conshohocken, and she had a coach, Phil Delata, so I took classes with Phil for quite a while. And now Milos Vasic is my coach at DDFC. He took over the club from Kate when Kate had other things she wanted to do. And so I've kind of had an odyssey from place to place. I've also taken lessons with a lot of people. Josef Vitebsky, the FA fencer, the FA coach, when he was at the Fencing Academy in Philadelphia, I took lessons with him. I took lessons with Tomasz Stasinski. I fenced everywhere, and some of the most influential people, to me, have been some of the first people who were saber coaches for women. Vladimir Naslimov is probably, every conversation I've had with him, every clinic I've taken with him, has been incredibly kind and informative and helpful. And sometimes I just channel how he demonstrates things and make touches. He's really, really good, and I admire him a lot. There were others like Frank Mastilli, Vladimir Lilov. The people who were willing to coach women in the beginning were kind of a big influence on me. And so were women. Like Ariana, you interviewed Ariana as your first interviewee, and she was one of my influences. She's awesome. In fact, I've taken a clinic with her. Whenever there's a chance to take a clinic or work with somebody, Andrew Lamiansky at Manhattan, there's an example, Matt Cox, all these people, whenever, or Jerome Guth, I go, I take a class, and I steal whatever I can from them and adapt it. I said, called me the other day, actually it was a couple of months ago, I said, I still use some of what you taught me in that. And he said, oh, well, that's all out of fashion now. I said, yeah, but I'm a veteran, and it works. It still works. And he said, oh, you've got a point. So follow from everybody.
Well, it's interesting that because you were at the forefront of women's saber, you kind of got to influence the style of the way that the weapon would be fenced, I would imagine. And since you had to put pieces together, did you find yourself being one of the creators of how we fence today because you were one of the first ones to do it?
I think, I don't know if I would go that far. I was definitely part of the group, part of the people who were trying it out. And I can't emphasize enough how poorly most people thought of us at that point. There were a few young women who were athletic who looked like saber fencers. Kelly Williams, Ariana, Julie Smith, who is now Julie Seal and is just coming back to the veterans. I'm so delighted to see her. There were a few of them who really looked like saber fencers. And in the beginning, I remember that there were times when the gentlemen would all say, oh, so-and-so looks like a saber fencer. And what they meant was that she looked like a male saber fencer. She was doing the actions. Well, as you know, women's saber looks different from men's saber.
Yes,
and it's a long while to adjust to that. The timing is different. The tactics are different. You're doing the same actions. It's the same weapon, but so much is different. And it was very hard for them in the beginning to see that we were doing something that was valid. And to a certain extent, maybe I was part of that, but I don't think I could claim to influence anybody except for the fact that I was a grown-up who was showing up. And I wasn't even one of the older ones. You had Ruby Watson. You had people like that who were incredible pioneers and just willing to do the weapon.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it took. Just some people that were willing to put themselves out there and give it a try.
Yeah. We didn't have Division I. We didn't have A's. We were allowed to do Division II as our maximum competition. I can't emphasize enough how much it was not yet done when I started, even though there were people who'd been doing it for a little while longer than I had.
And yet, eventually, you did fence Division I. So
yeah.
How did that all come about?
Well, here's something where I don't remember the exact chronology, but I was at the first Division I Nationals I think it was partly there were a whole bunch of opportunities. There was going to be people started thinking in terms of NCAA fencing and in terms of Olympic fencing, and I'm not sure what the sequence was because I was just there. I wasn't paying attention to it, in terms of noting the time. But when coaches started and parents started to realize that girls could fence saber and have it be worthwhile instead of, as often happened, somebody who wasn't good at epee or foil would get put into saber because that was all that there was for them. Yeah. When I started seeing it as an opportunity, then we started having more things. I was at the first Division I Nationals, and I did not finish in the top 8. I was not one of the first A's.
Dang it.
Dang it. But I was there, and it was exciting. It was so much fun to be part of. I sent you a picture a while back of a bunch of the women who were in that group, yes. And some of them are still around as coaches, and some are still competing.
Mm-hmm. I have it on good authority that you frustrated many young fencers at that Division I event.
That's my specialty. When I fence a young person who's going to be good, I can actually usually beat them very, very soundly if they're going to be good because they make the correct actions at the correct time, but they're not quite there yet. Yes. So I just show them what I want them to see, and they go for it. I have beaten many members of our Olympic teams. Let me put it that way, and I won't say who, but I have. And usually, I feel bad sometimes, but I do say to them, "You are going to be good. You are going to be beating me. Mm-hmm. It's going to happen because I'm beating you so soundly right now. Because somebody who's confusing, as you well know, is very hard to beat. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's clear and correct and well trained and making the correct tactical choices. I've been fencing long enough, and had been fencing long enough then to cause them serious problems."
Yep. I often see the role of veteran fencers as exactly that. We're there to make the young ones great. And if they can beat us because of all of our experience and wiliness, then yes, it's like we're one of those walls that they have to learn to climb over.
Somebody said to me once, "You have to get through Delia if you want to be good." And it amused me. It was quite a compliment. I was thrilled. I forget who it was, but it was like, "Aw, thank you."
Oh, that's an awesome compliment. Wow. So talk to me just a little bit about your fencing career. You've been part of the World Veteran Team, I think 11 times. You've had good success there. Not necessarily just your successes, though, but just kind of some steps in your overall career.
Yeah, my first national event was Division II and III, and I earned my D at that event. Never had a C either. And for a while there, while we were starting out, I went to a lot of national events, Division IIs, Division IIIs, and routinely medaled. It was not a strong weapon at that point, not a lot of young people, and I got a lot of medals. So I have a bunch of those. It's kind of cool, I can brag in a very kind of backhanded way because, as I say, it wasn't super good. And then it started to get better. As I said, there was college fencing, there was Olympic fencing on the horizon, and I continued to fence Division I. But the moment that there was veteran fencing available, I was also doing that, and it wasn't for anything because even though they had veteran worlds, they didn't have women's saber until 2002. I forget the exact year. It was 2002 or 2003 was when they first had women's saber. Oh, that was the demo. 2005, I think, was the first year in Veteran Worlds. So I was just doing whatever I could. And this will sound funny, but in your 40s, you're still much closer to being what you were in your 20s. And I was still very competitive in Division I, and when they had Division 1A, the first Summer Nationals, when they had things like that, I was able to do well in Division 1A. I have a Division I top 8 medal. I finished third in Division 1A and earned my A in 2001. And at that point, kind of like the marathon that I ran a long time ago, I realized I was never going to do better than that in Division 1A. It required a lot of work. I was very strong. I was very thin. I had been working out very hard, and the best I could do was third in the Division 1A. So I started to back away a little bit from the Division 1 and the Division 1A, and I don't do it much anymore. I'll do the rock, but I won't do Division 1 or Division 1A at the national level. It's kind of counterproductive for me. Mm-hmm. And after that, the first demonstration event was Tampa Veteran Worlds. And that was open to anybody over 40. And they were not enthusiastic about including us. We were not real good at that point, and we knew it, and they knew it. But the guys who were active in promoting women's Sabre just did a wonderful job of setting up. There were trophies, there were awards. It was just so supportive. And because it was Tampa, it was in the United States. I went down to, be part of the group, and it was really exciting to be part of that, even if it was a demonstration event and it wasn't an FIE medal. And the funny thing was that they had a really nice trophy for the highest over 50 finisher, and I won the event and gave the trophy to the next highest 50 and over finisher, who was, by the way, Dee Nicolau. I don't know if you remember. She was a very athletic fencer, a very good fencer, and she had a fall from a horse a few years ago and is quadriplegic now. Oh. But she was one of the most remarkable people. There were some incredible heroes in those early veteran women's Sabre cadre.
Yes. Yeah, I'm thinking about some of the names that you've said. These are new ones to me, but I'm always grateful to all of you that started this weapon, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do without all of you. And
you forget it now. And Diane Ferguson, Sandy Harris, they were like, oh, there's so many people. It was just they were working hard. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What advice do you have for adults that want to start fencing?
It takes a while. It takes us longer than it takes the kids. That's because we try to think about it and we try to learn it. And when I say learn, imagine in quotes in the air. We try to study it the way we would something in school. Kids pick it up. Mm-hmm. They just do it. Adults are very conscious about how they take it up. And so they try to study it. I studied rec sport fencing. I read things about fencing. I asked people's advice. I worked really hard. And I think it took me about the same amount of time as it would have if I had just taken lessons and shown up at the club. But I wanted to know. There's this feeling of wanting to know what you're doing. And honestly, the first few years, I didn't know what I was doing. My coach would say, yes, that's it, when I was fencing. And I'd say, that's what? I have no idea what you're talking about. You give me this lesson, and any Sabre lesson, it's openings and it's opportunities, and you're supposed to see things, and it's all nonverbal. And for a verbal adult, that's torture. Yes. So I spent a lot of time not knowing what I was doing. I think that's advice I give to veteran Sabre fencers, veteran fencers in general, a lot of the time, is take it easy on yourself. Trust yourself. You're going to learn it, but it'll take a little while. It's okay. The other thing is, don't overtrain. The older you are, the more rest is important. And a lot of veteran fencers think that if they grind it out at the gym, they work way too hard and they knock themselves out, they're going to be just incredibly back to what they were when they were 15. It doesn't work that way. Yeah. You have to give yourself recovery time. It's really important. And cross-training, I think, is a very good idea. My advice as I said, I often give parents the advice that they should take up fencing themselves, because their kids will learn that A, they are not the center of the universe, which is a very important thing for kids to learn, and B, that life goes on after you are a kid, and C, you will be leaving your kid alone when they are having a meltdown on the strip, because you'll be thinking about your own fencing.
Right.
That's not easy.
No. No, it's not. And actually, there was just a good article in American Fencing about that.
Yeah.
That was my favorite article in the current issue, is how to be a good fencing parent.
It's not easy, and I am not going to tell you that I was perfect at it myself. I didn't know what the kid was doing. I was not allowed on the strip. I was not allowed near the strip. And 5 years out of college, because she fenced all the way through college, she was co-captain of the fencing team. And 5 years out of college, I asked her if she wanted to come to a NAC with me and compete. And she said, oh, sure. So she took a couple of lessons, came back, and won the Division III in FA.
Oh, my gosh.
And I was not allowed near the strip during this. This is somebody who's 5 years out of college. I wasn't allowed nearby. And when she won, I went, yay! And she gave me a ferocious glare. Oh. And I said, you can't do anything to me now. But so it's very hard to be a parent. It is not easy. And you worry about your kids. You can't help it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Talk about your first international fencing competition and how it compared to your most recent one.
Well, I was nervous as all get out. Of course, that was the second Tampa was my first official Veteran World. I've done World Cups, regular World Cups. I did a couple when they were in the United States early on when they had World Cups. But so I was used to it. Mm-hmm. I was used to the idea, and I knew that it wasn't all that different from a national event. In fact, we run really good national events. Mm. Honestly, they are well run. An international event is really basically the same as a NAC in a lot of ways, except you don't know most of the people.
Right.
And it tends to be run on time most of the time, and it's not all that different. But my first official one, I was nervous as all get out, and scared, and I think anybody their first time on an international team is like so preoccupied with the newness of it that it actually gets in the way of their accomplishment. And the first official one I was in, I didn't win. Jane won that one. Jane Eyre won that one. I had won the demo. She won the first official one. And it was just nerves. You get yourself pumped up. You're all excited, and you're not sure what to expect. And that's really different from what it's like now. I'm still. Somebody said to me in Portland, a friend said to me, "How do you keep from being nervous?" And I said, "I'm always nervous. I am always nervous at competitions. I am sick to my stomach. I want to die. I hate everybody. Adrenaline makes me really, really uncomfortable, but I'm used to it. And I know adrenaline is not a big deal. So it's different now internally. The other thing is also that I think the Veteran Worlds are much more of a show, much more elaborate than they were when I first started. They were very informal, very social, little occasions. And my first one was in a hotel in Tampa. It was kind of, low key. It was exciting, but it wasn't anything like Slovenia, which was really interesting. You're in these places you would never go. It wouldn't occur to me to go to Slovenia, but it was a really pretty country and beautiful landscape, nice people. The food was good. They were running it on a budget, so the Army was helping with the first aid and things like that. All these cute young people in their khakis and their camouflage. Mm-hmm. And you have FIE referees, often ones who are on their way up, often very good ones. And so it gets called differently at an international event than we're used to in the United States, where they tended, up until recently, they tended to not call it terribly tight in women's sabre in the United States because, it's just veterans. Well, yeah, I got news for you. The FIE refs call it tight. Mm-hmm. And you need to know how what's going to be called against you when you're there.
Right.
It's a very busy place. It's very fast. But the biggest difference between an international world championships and a NAC is that you are a member of a team. You are not an individual. even though you are in an individual event, even though you are competing against your teammates, you're still representing your country and you're still part of a team. And you have a team captain. Often we'll have an armorer. We had somebody who was helping us out with first aid and things like that. There's banquets. There's things like this. You're part of a team. You're supporting your teammates, and you don't get coached if you are fencing a teammate. People back off from the strip. Jeanette Starks-Faulkner and I had defense in Slovenia against each other, and my coach just went about 6 strips away and watched with his heart in his mouth while we fenced, because it's really, we're teammates. We can't against each other unless you're like a family member or something like that. And so it tends to be when you're fencing your teammate, it's kind of dead air. It's very interesting. And then the team event is really exciting because you're actually competing against other countries. That's a tough one for a lot of people to take because the seeding for team depends on how you did in the individual. And so you don't know if you're going to be doing the team until the day before.
That would be hard to prepare mentally for, I would think, that because, you don't know.
No. Well, I always stay an extra day just in case, and I fenced the team a lot of times. Like I've gotten subbed in when I wasn't the top seed, and you need to be there as the backup in case people can't be there. As I say, it's a team sport. Now, that doesn't mean you're not trying to defeat your teammates in the individual. As I say, Jeanette and I fenced each other, and by God, we were trying our best to beat each other. But that's the difference. It's people come kind of, it's like, if you've ever gone to a local veteran event and you see a first-time person there and they're a little aloof and they don't want to talk to you and they're like nervous and they see you as the competition, but we're all there together and being friendly. It's kind of the same first-time competitor at Veteran Worlds. They're sure that they're on their own and they don't realize that we're there to help them. It really is a team sport.
Well, I think fencers in general are very helpful toward one another, but veteran fencers even more.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the referees love us, especially the women veteran fencers, because we laugh and joke and support one another while we're fencing, which must drive them crazy.
Actually, all the refs I've talked to really enjoy refereeing those events.
That's nice.
Yeah. Okay, so we have talked a lot about your fencing career, but that's only part of who you are. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your role as an educator, as a published author, and as it turns out, fountain pen collector. So you were a science and an English teacher at Haverford School, which was an all-boys school, for about 25 years, and you retired a year and a half ago. Now you're an adjunct at Temple University. Are there any teaching skills that helped you with your fencing? And are there any fencing skills that helped you with your teaching?
That's an interesting question. I know how to learn. And that's something that a teacher must know how to do. Not just for their students, but for themselves. Because whenever you're teaching something, you have to learn it better than your students in order to be able to have them learn it. And it's important to understand. It's kind of like what I said earlier about lessons. The student does the learning. The student does all of the work. But the teacher, by knowing the subject, is able to guide them in directions where they will be able to learn it correctly. I don't believe that you somehow hand knowledge over to a student. It doesn't work that way. So you really have to know how to learn. In a lot of ways, fencing for me was a refuge from teaching, because most of the time teachers are thinking about teaching. It is one of the most absorbing jobs, as a coach, that you are constantly thinking about solving problems, figuring things out, devising lessons, learning something new. And I would go out twice a week and fence and not think about any of that. So in a lot of ways, fencing for me was a way to get out of my head, to get out of myself, a meditation in action. So my skills as an educator, I didn't use a whole lot in fencing, except in understanding why I was learning the way I was learning, and in being patient with myself. I did coach fencing at Haverford School for about 20 years. I kept it to Sabre, and I kept it pretty low key, and it was introductory. So that was fun, and I loved getting to know the kids in a different way. And as you know, you see kids in a different way when you're coaching them than when you're teaching them.
Did being a fencer give you any cred at school?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That helped a lot. It being a boys' school, I will be candid and say that when a young man who I recommended for his job won the local regional championships, the sectionals, they gave him a big party and we're all excited. And when I came in a couple of years later and said I had won sectionals, they were like, oh, that's nice. Because I was an older woman and therefore not really an athlete because it's a boys' school. They can't help themselves.
Right.
It's a great place and I loved it. But it did give me a huge amount of cred in terms of dealing with the boys. Not just cred, but also understanding sports. And being their coach really helped as well. In the classroom, sometimes I would joke with them because it was a private school. I'd say, oh, yeah, I hit my students on the head when they get things wrong. And a new student would be looking at me with alarmed eyes. And I'd turn to one of my fencers and I'd say, don't I? And he said, oh, yeah, it's loud. But, yeah, you get to know kids in a different way when you coach them. That's one of the nice things about a private school is that generally you're doing 5 million other things. And honestly, I got more cred from having a doctorate than I did from being a fencer, though, because the parents had to call me Dr. Turner, so that helped with parent conferences.
Sure. Oh, that's great. Well, I think I read a story somewhere that you had like a glove up on a bulletin board in your room or something like that.
The blood stain.
Yes. Yeah. From when you got a hand injury.
Yeah, I was fencing. This is funny because I was fencing at Tomasz Szynski's club, and Annie Menino was there, and because she practiced at his club. And as you know, the tip of the saber with its little curl is ideally formed to punch with a point touch. Right. So it punched me in the palm. It was a point counterattack from a very nice young man who was a light-handed fencer, and it went into my wrist. It went all the way into my wrist. And Tomasz thought that I was yelling because I had scored the touch, because I scored the touch. But then I started to bleed all over the place. And I drove home. Annie and Tomasz had been at another injury that had happened in Sabre years before. And Annie's an emergency room nurse. Both of them had been right there when a much worse puncture injury had occurred. And so she was able to get me kind of patched together. I drove home with my arm elevated, though, and the blood pooled in it, and it turned kind of black. And I said, oh, I guess I'd better go to the emergency room.
Oh, my goodness.
But the glove had a hole in it and a blood stain. And I thought, this is an excellent thing to stick up on the bulletin board at school, which is one of the nice things, again, about teaching in a private school. You have a little more leeway to be I would not do that at a public school.
No.
but my boys thought it was wonderful, like, oh, my gosh.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
Oh, that's
yes.
so great.
So my students were impressed.
Yes, I'm sure. The first day of classes when I was teaching in public school, I would use my Sabre to point at different things on the overhead projector.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and kind of intimidate just a little, but also show them part of my character. And I feel like the glove was your way of doing that.
Yeah, and it was fun with the kids because boys often are very worried about offending women, and they're often very sensitive. And it was one of the ways that I kind of could bond with them about saying, no, go ahead, I can handle it. Look at this. So it was a nice thing for them. Building relationships is a huge part of teaching.
Yes, that is so true. Well, let's talk a little bit about your blog. It's dmturner.org. There was a quote that you put on there that I'd like to share with the audience. It says, despite decades as a teacher and despite various graduate degrees, she was not actually qualified to teach any of the subjects she taught. She attributes her success to her complete inability to focus and to a fondness for footnotes. With a little asterisk, and I had to go down to the bottom to read the fondness for footnotes. I just started laughing out loud at that point. Can you please explain what you meant, though, by not being qualified?
I taught science for 10 years. I took geology in college. I think that's it. Then I taught English for 12 years and became the department chair for a K-12 school in English. And my bachelor's degree is in art.
Wow.
I am a fine artist. Yeah. So it's important to say that almost every job I've had has been either or both temporary and part-time. So the job at Haverford was a temporary part-time job that I took to help a friend out, and it lasted for 23 years.
Got it.
Every job I've had has been pretty much temporary or part-time, and I often recommend to people who are looking for work to take whatever comes down the pike. Mm-hmm. Because if you're competent, you get hired, and that's what happened to me. And so really, I'm qualified to be an elementary school teacher, and I'm actually qualified to do what I'm doing right now, which is coaching student teachers as an adjunct at Temple University. And I love working with the young people. They're awesome. It's a great university. They have a great fencing team. But I would say that the inability to focus is something that's very important about me, and that's also another reason why I like Sabre. I'm pretty severely ADHD. I'll tell you a story. My mother, one day, when she was in the nursing home, when I was taking care of her, she said to me, "Your sister and I took a test for you for ADHD, and you really do have it." And I said, "Yeah, Mom." And she said, "We thought you were doing it on purpose." And I said, "No, Mom. I am unable to focus on one thing. It's very hard for me." And one of the reasons that I've had so much success is that I can hyper-focus on all kinds of things. And if I do them sequentially, I do this and that and the other thing. And so I've been able to take on a lot of things that if I were able to focus a little bit better and I were more like really zoned in on one field, I would have done real well at that. But I've had a lot of success at a lot of odd things. I've been a calligrapher. I've been a teacher. The fencing is another thing. There's all these things that I've done that were just impulses. Mm-hmm. And the footnotes are related to that. In fact, I'm reading a book about footnotes right now. So
there's a book about footnotes?
There is a book about footnotes. It's written by a historian. And I was delighted after 2 very long chapters about historical footnotes, which are very carefully done. He started talking about satirical footnotes, which apparently was a thing in the 16th and 17th century.
Who knew? Wow.
No, right? Okay. Well, I'm interested.
Well, speaking about books, you have written a couple of them yourself, and I checked them out. They're available on Amazon.
Out of print.
But they were compiled into The Ways of Magic.
Right.
And can you talk about your inspiration for those books and, the whole process of being a writer? Sounds like you weren't quote unquote qualified for that either, but somehow managed to do it. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I've been writing all my life. As a kid, which is not unusual for ADHD girls, I was in a fantasy most of the time, and I mean really in a fantasy. I was completely disconnected. So I told myself stories almost all the time. And I've actually been a writer most of my life, and I've written a lot of other novels. And those 2, I wrote the first one because I had a good story. It happened, so I wrote it. And I sent it off to a publisher, and they liked it, but they asked me to be patient with them because they were going through turmoil, which in fact happens at publishers. And after about a year and a half, I asked them again what's happening. They said, it's gone through a reading. We really like it, but could you be patient with us? And I said, no, I can't. I'm starting to get obsessed with the mailman. This is before email. And so I asked for it back and stuck it in a drawer. And a neighbor who was working for an agent started chatting with me about a book he had written. And because it was an intensely boring book with a lot of backstory, one of those high fantasies, I finally broke in and said I had written one. And he said, oh, can I see it? Because I get a commission if my boss publishes a book. So my agent read it, sent it off. It got published, and they asked me for a second book.
Wow.
It doesn't happen that way. Yeah, it doesn't happen that way.
It seems so easy.
Yeah. And it was... You actually commented on this earlier about the character being a young woman making it on her own in a man's world. Well, remember, these were composed in the 1980s, and I grew up reading science fiction in the 50s and the 60s. We did not have female protagonists. Robert A. Heinlein wrote girls into some of his books. They were brilliant geniuses who talked like no girl that I had ever met. And if you were alive in the 50s and 60s and you were reading, women didn't really exist except as temptresses or sex objects or domestics or something. They were not full people. And so for me, writing a story often meant being me in a world that was really dominated by men. Mm-hmm. I don't write that way anymore. I've got 3 books drafted at this point since I retired. I'm planning to send them out one of these days soon. It's a different kind of protagonist, but writing is something you just do every day. What I used to tell my students, and I tell anybody who wants to write, the difference between a published writer and just a writer is that published writers send their books out. That's really it. There are some awful writers out there who are published and some brilliant writers who aren't. And it's like fencing. You have to take that step of going out to the tournament, of sending your stories out. I've had lots of stories rejected, and I've had them accepted. And there's no rhyme or reason on how you get them accepted, because it's just what they needed at the time.
Right.
I like to write, and I prefer writing for female protagonists, and I write fantasy, but I don't really believe in magic. But it makes a great form of fiction. I love it. Mm-hmm. I love to read it, and I love to write it.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me talk just a little bit about the protagonists that you were alluding to. Their names are Lizanne and Malka, I believe.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And they, as you mentioned, are both strong young women who are trapped in a male-dominated society and who must use their determination and wits to survive. If you were to write these books in today's political climate, how would these characters be the same or different?
They'd still be a royal pain in the butt, but there would be a lot of women that they were dealing with most of the time. Because it is the idea, and going back to Star Trek fandom, and I was a Star Trek fan from the old series and then the Next Generation, there was a type of fan story that started to be written called the Mary Sue. The protagonist, usually a female, who got things done and knew things. And it didn't occur to me until decades later that meant a protagonist, not just a female protagonist. And I like that kind of protagonist, somebody who is basically trying to make it in a world that is not exactly easy to deal with and that is not set up for them. There's somebody who's an outsider. That makes for an interesting plot, and people tend to, as readers, identify with that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Clearly, I'm not writing the great American novel. I'm reading escapist fiction, and for that, you need to be able to identify with the protagonist and not get utterly disgusted with them, as occasionally happens with really good literature when you read something and you go, well, not happening. I don't like that. Why don't you just... I remember a Styron novel I read where I kept saying, why doesn't this guy just stop drinking? So annoying. But in a fantasy, in an action adventure, you really want to identify with him. Mm-hmm. And so it would still be protagonist against the universe, but there would be a whole lot of other characters in there some of them helping and some hindering, and there would be a lot more women in there.
Okay, I've got to know about the fountain pens.
Yeah. Do you like fountain pens?
I love fountain pens. When I was in France, that was one of my going away gifts because I had really come to love that style of writing. And
Yeah.
I still have it. I've got the little Waterman cartridges for it. But how did you develop your love for them?
I was in school in the 1960s, and in my school store, there were student pens called Esther books. They were fountain pens. And I like them. I like to write. I like to draw. And for me, that it's related to Sabre. I hate to tell you this. The line that you draw with a Sabre is very much related to the line that you draw if you're using a fountain pen properly. It's smooth, it's flowing, it's precise. There's this way of moving through the world that you can't get with a ballpoint pen. And a fountain pen has this liquid line that it leaves that is just beautiful. I started writing with the Esther books, and years later when I had my own income, I started buying them. I used to buy the Waterman Phileas. I bought a bunch of pens. I usually lose them because, as I said, I am easily distracted and unable to focus, so I lose a lot of pens. There's some pens I own that are not allowed to leave the house, and I still lose them and find them in a pocket somewhere like days later. I have quite a collection, but as I probably said to you earlier, I'm not really a collector. I'm not the kind of person who collects things and makes lists of when I acquired them and has them in a case and never uses them. I'm somebody who uses them to write with. Right now I have 7 fountain pens each, and probably 50 or 60 others. Some of them are valuable. Some of them are very cheap. I just love the way they feel in the hand, the same way that a Sabre feels in my hand. As I said, I was a calligrapher for a while. I taught myself to do that, and I did it professionally for a while. And I also did something because I believe that when you're teaching, you need to teach what Neil Postman used to say, counterculture. You need to teach against the culture. I taught my students how to write in cursive.
Oh, you evil woman, you.
Yes. Well, it's a skill, and I'm actually a real techie. I love technology. I'm a big fan. I've always had the latest toy, but you should not lose the ability to do something that other people can't do, whether it's knowing how to diagram a sentence, which is another evil skill, or writing with a fountain pen. People thought because I was an English teacher that I was a grammar cop. I'm not. I believe that language is living, and I believe that it's creative, but I also believe that it's fun to learn this stuff. How to use a fountain pen, how to diagram a sentence, how to figure out the grammar of a sentence, how to write an original sentence. It's exciting, it's fun. And so for me, fountain pens are all about just like the Sabre, the pleasure of moving through space and leaving a line.
Very good. Well, we are coming to the end of our time together, so I'm going to finish up this interview with a mixture of the famous questions from James Lipton and Marcel Proust. What is your favorite word?
Oddly enough, it is a nonsense word from the old comic strip Pogo, Wauerbasil.
What is your least favorite word?
That's a tough one. Vapid.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love dubstep.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Easy listening. I cannot stand it.
No Kenny G for you?
No, Jesus, and it makes my skin crawl.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think pretty much everything that I could. I've done what I wanted to do. Being a calligrapher, being an artist, working in various places in a museum, being a teacher, working in a university. I can't even think of anything else. Whatever comes down the pike is what I'd like to do. I've coached. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a Weasley answer, but whatever I felt like doing, I went ahead and did.
And what profession would you not like to do?
I don't think I would like to be a lawyer.
Why is that?
A lot of it is very repetitive, and it involves really knowing a lot of things that you have to piece together in a very systematic way to create your briefs. You have to use lots and lots of phrases from other places, and it's creative, but it's creative kind of like Legos, which I was not good at either.
Mm-hmm. Like you have a limited set of blocks, and then you have to create your own things from that limited set.
I worked as a legal secretary for a while, and that's when I realized I wouldn't want to be a lawyer. They also have to work really hard, and they have to bill by the hour.
Yes. Where would you like to live?
I love Philadelphia. I love the city. If I won the lottery, I would probably get myself an apartment in London because I love London. But I'd have to have a whole lot of money because it's really expensive to live in the nice parts of London. Incredibly expensive. But I'm living where I'd love to live. I literally moved here from the suburbs once my daughter was grown up, and we were in a position to move with not needing the school districts. And I live in a funky, tough, urban neighborhood, and I love it. I love it where I live.
What do you value most in your friends?
Willingness to put up with me. I'm very hyper. I am very intense. I talk a lot, and I find that people I'm friends with are kind to me. So, and that's a wide assortment of people. Some of them talk as much as I do, but that tolerance is really important. And so I value in friends the willingness to put up with me. And if you're a friend to me, I'm always going to be your friend.
Who is your hero?
That's a tough question. In a lot of ways, my mom. She had a PhD in microbiology, and in the 70s and 80s, she was one of the first women Episcopal priests. Wow. And she was a role model to me that could not be equaled. And she also helped me get through very tough times, and I helped her get through the last 10 years of her life, and I really admire her. Mm-hmm. It was not easy being her. She grew up when you became a mother the moment you got married, and you got married right out of college, and
If you went to college.
Yeah, if you went to college, and a lot of people left college when they got a boyfriend and got married, and she kept going. She was willing to do what it took.
And finally, what is your motto?
Show up. Keep showing up. And that's how you learn anything, how you get to do anything. There have been times when I wanted to quit. And if you just keep showing up, eventually you figure out how to do things. The people who know more than you sometimes stick around and sometimes go away, and you end up being the person who knows how to do things. And really, it's just about showing up. I set my sights pretty low. It sounds like it's really funny, but it's easy to be real hard on yourself and say, I've got to do a perfect job. And my motto is just show up.
Well, Delia, this has been a delightful hour. Thank you so much. This has just been great.
Well, I'm charmed that you asked me. I'm kind of surprised, but delighted. And it was really nice of you to ask me. And I did think a lot about your questions. I thought they were really interesting ones. And I admire you as someone who is a really good veteran saber fencer.
Well, I look forward to the next time that you are across from me on the strip.
All right. We're on.
All right.
A big thank you, as always, to my friend and teammate, Tony Escueda, who edits all of these interviews and who created the music for this podcast. Thank you as well to my sponsor, Cutting Edge Fencing Center, for providing me with all of the swag, like the stickers, the patches, that I give out to people at national and local tournaments. Thank you as well to my husband, David Sierra, who's always very supportive of my crazy endeavors. And a huge thanks to all of my listeners out there who have been pestering me over the past few months to get another episode or two out on this podcast. I really appreciate your messages of support, and it's thanks to you that I'm able to do this podcast at all. If you have any requests for interviews or ideas for people that you'd like to hear me interview, please email me at sabrecoachkate@gmail.com. You can also get in contact with me through my Facebook page. All of my interviews, as well as articles about fencing, are posted on my blog at sabrecoachkate.wordpress.com. Thanks again for tuning in today.